As you can probably tell, I'd already started working on this project. My phone didn't save the first half of it, so we're picking up in the second half. Now, some of you may already know that in my work life, I was a paralegal, and I worked in nearly all practice areas, but the majority of my time was spent in family law. And obviously, it can be really emotionally charged, and a lot of people hate working in family law because of that, but others, like myself, loved it because every day is something different. And that's what I'm going to talk about. Some of the more interesting events I've witnessed while working in family law. So one of the first firms that I worked for a partner in that law firm, and we had a lot of contacts on Capitol Hill. Now, I was never involved in any case that involved a politician, so don't ask me. But we did get some high-profile clients because of our reputation. And one of the clients was the husband in this case, and he was a psychiatrist. And this was his second marriage, and the wife was still living in the marital home, but he had moved out. And one of the biggest contentions in the marriage that led him to file for divorce was her spending. She didn't just spend, she would spend. He was extremely well off, obviously, and he indulged her at first, but it was clearly an addiction. He tried to cut her off, but she went out and applied for credit cards in his name without telling him. She got a home equity line of credit on their house and didn't tell him. So, yeah, he was done. One of her biggest addictions was clothing. Clothing, shoes, bags. Very high-end clothing, shoes, and bags. Louis Vuitton, Gucci, Versace, Fendi, Dior, Prada, Jimmy Choo, all the names. And, typically in any legal case, a lawyer and his or her staff, you don't have direct communication with the other party. Everything goes through the attorneys. But this woman apparently was not easy to get along with. She'd already gotten through a number of attorneys, and it had gotten to the point where, to make things easier, we just agreed to talk to her about certain things if they weren't part of the divorce settlement. And by we, I mean me. So, for example, she had called once asking for permission to buy plants for landscaping at the marital home. And the marital home was going to be sold, so, making it more appealing, have more curb appeal, asking to do this wasn't an unreasonable request, right? So the problem is that she wanted high-end everything. And believe it or not, there are high-end, posh, hoity-toity garden centers. And then there are your regular garden centers. So I would have to mediate to find something that was more reasonable. Otherwise, who knew how much she would spend? So for an example, I had to get an estimate from her what she wanted to do, then run it by our client for his approval, and then contact a garden center to explain the situation, provide them with a credit card number and the maximum amount they were allowed to charge. And if she tried to charge more than what she was allowed, they were supposed to call me. Well, she did, and they did, and it was refused. So anyway, that's just an example of the kind of things that I'd have to deal with, which were unusual for a case like this. You just normally didn't do this sort of stuff. Now, when our client left the marital home, he took with her some of her clothing, shoes, and purses, and he took it to his suite of offices. And when I first started on this case, I really didn't understand why he would do that, but when I became more familiar with what her addiction was, it started to make sense. But anyway, the wife wanted to go to the office suite and pick out, she wanted some of her belongings, she wanted some of her clothing. But he didn't want to be there because there could probably be a confrontation, but she couldn't be allowed to be there on her own. So my boss asked me to go to our client's office suite and supervise. And all I was told was that she was only able to take items which had the tags removed. And I thought, okay, not a problem. So I go to our client's office and he greets me and he takes me to where the clothing is. And, I'm thinking closet, big closet maybe, but closet. It was not a closet. It was a conference room. It was a 20-foot by 20-foot conference room lined up one wall and down the other with all these clothing racks filled, stuffed with clothing. And on top of all the clothing racks were boxes and boxes of shoes. And then there was one or two racks that had designer handbags hanging on them or situated somehow on them. And I mean, other than walking into a clothing store, I'd never seen anything like this. I'd seen walk-in closets in people's homes before, but nothing like this. So I'm in shock. But the client asked me, did I know what she was allowed to take? And I said, yeah, I knew she could only take the things that had tags on them. And he said, okay. And he comes over, takes me over to this one rack, and he said, these are the ones that I found that didn't have tags on them. And it was one rack, and I mean, we're talking about a dozen or more than a dozen racks, and only one of them had clothing on it that didn't have tags on it. And I'm like, is that it? Are you sure? And he's like, yeah, I'm sure. I went through everything. He said, I could have missed one or two, but this is what I think it is. So I couldn't believe that all these other items of clothing, you guys, she bought and never wore. They all had the tags on, the Fendi, the Gucci, the Prada, with, they're thousands of dollars each worth of tags on these clothing, and she never even wore them. Anyway, as far as the shoes were concerned, he said he checked all of them. There were no scuff marks on the bottom of any of those shoes. So the assumption was that they'd never been worn and she couldn't take any of them. So our client leaves and the wife arrives, and I take her back to the room and I showed her what had been separated out as previously worn. And I said, look, I can give you an hour to go through the other racks, but then I've got to go. I can't stay longer than that because I didn't want to give her the opportunity to stay forever and go through all this. So she starts going through the clothes and she's moving pretty quickly. And I'm thinking, okay, this is not going to be a problem. And then she slows down and she slows down more and more until I notice that she's just standing there in front of a rack and she's running her hands over the clothes, caressing them. And I finally realized she's crying. And so I cleared my throat and I said, are you done? Because if you're done, your movers can come in and take the rack of clothes now. And she just turned to me and she starts crying and sobbing. They're so beautiful. What am I going to do without them? Like these were her children that she was losing custody of. And I'm just like, I don't know. And I said, but, if you're done, we need to get the movers in now. I was afraid she's going to fall on the clothes, hold on to them, refuse to let go, and I'd have to call the police. But luckily, she pulled herself together, and that was the end of that. And then after the divorce was final, we helped our client arrange to auction off all the stuff that she'd bought so that he could pay back some of the debt she had amassed. He couldn't return it. He didn't have any receipts. So all these clothing items with tags still on them got sold at auction. Okay. Then there was another case where we were representing the wife. And this was a case of infidelity by the husband. Now, we're in a no-fault state, so you can't use adultery as the grounds of divorce. But if you have documented information about infidelity, sometimes it can be used to influence the court in things like child custody if it's kind of, not too cool what's going on. But, infidelity is never cool, but, if it was just really horrendous. But anyway. The husband had already moved out of the home even before our client came to sue for divorce. So when we serve complaints and subpoenas, we use a private investigator. And of course, we use the private investigator for gathering information. But in this case, we were kind of having trouble trying to find this guy and get him served. We knew where he lived, but he was avoiding service. And we were also trying to serve the woman he was having the affair with, but she was also evading us. So what happens when you can't serve someone is that there are alternative forms of service rather than doing it in person, but doing it in person is always best, obviously. But we were getting to the point, it had been so long, we wanted to move the process along. Our client didn't want to wait forever, so we were going to try alternative service. But then one day the wife called me and she said that her husband was going to pick up the kids from school that Friday. He had that Friday afternoon, and he was going to have the weekend with them. So she gave us the description of his car, the license plate, the address of the school, how the pickup line worked so that we would know where he would be. And so I called our private investigator, and he already had a physical description of the guy from trying to serve him previously, and told him what was going on. And he said, okay, he's going to go ahead and serve them. So usually they don't call, the private investigator won't call us unless he has already served it and he's on his way with the paperwork, or sometimes he just shows up with the paperwork. But this time the guy calls me and he says, well, I'm here and I think I see the car. Can you confirm the description? I did. And he said, okay, yep, it's here and it's in the side parking lot. And it's an hour before the time the guy needed to be there to pick up the kids. And, I always say the obvious, but I'm like, he's there? He doesn't need to be there for another hour. Is he in the car? And the guy goes, yep, he's in the car. So I'm going to go serve him. I'm like, okay. So a few minutes later, he calls to say that he has served the document and he's on his way back. I'm like, okay. So usually when a private investigator or service processor serves something on somebody, there's an affidavit of service they need to fill out. Excuse me, I'm losing my voice. And the affidavit of service has details of what happened, like what was served, what document was served, the date and time it was served. Excuse me, I'm going to take a quick drink. And they usually have a place where you put a little bit of information about what the person looked like, or that they identified themselves to be the person, just to confirm that you've actually given it to the person that it was intended for. And, list the location and, all the details. So anyway, our private investigator comes in, he drops the paperwork off on my desk, doesn't say anything. Usually he stops and chats for a little bit, and I wasn't that busy, but, he took off. And I'm like, okay. So I was busy. I set it aside, went on to do something else, and then I came back to it. I came back to it, and I took it out of the envelope, and I started reading it, and I just started laughing. The attorney comes down like, what is going on? So I read the description that he put on the affidavit of service. So he puts the name of the husband, and he says that the recipient was served the documents by direct service, okay? The recipient was in the back seat of the car in a face-down, prone position with his trousers down around his ankles. He was able to determine that he had brown hair and that despite his prone position, based on the width of the vehicle, he was able to estimate the height, which comported with the height of the husband. He knocked on the car window. The husband, the recipient, raised his head, cracked the window, and accepted the document. But guys, it doesn't end there. I look in the envelope, and there's another affidavit of service. And this one read, the recipient was in the back seat of the car, face up in a prone position, and underneath, and the husband's name. When the husband raised up his head to accept receipt of the document, this server was able to identify the recipient as being the name of the woman he was having the affair with, and that based on the width of the vehicle, he was able to estimate the height of the recipient to be whatever. So they both got served while they were bumping uglies in the parking lot of the elementary school where this couple's children went to school. Needless to say, our client got pretty much everything she wanted. Okay, I'm going to try and get through this next one before I run out of video here. But the next one is about a couple, and they liked playing an online game together. And the online game they liked to play was Second Life, and maybe you've heard of it. It's been around for about 20 years. It's more sophisticated now than it was when it was started. But in case you never heard of it, you go in, you create a character, an avatar, and you're called a resident of Second Life. You can decide what you're going to look like, what your background is, what your interests are, and you can be whoever you want to be. You can be who you are, like who you are in real life, or completely different. And it's a multiplayer online world. You get to do all the things you do in your real world, and you can create situations. You can actually go in there and you can open up a nightclub, and you can charge people to come into your nightclub because it costs money to be able to get all the software to be able to do that. And so you're interacting with other people who are actual people, but also in there with their avatars. And so it's kind of like Sims, but the big difference is that in Sims you have different things you can get to build your city, whereas in Second Life you create everything. So anyway, our client and her husband had been playing Second Life for a while, and sometimes they would play at the same time on separate computers. Sometimes they would go online when their partner wasn't online, and I bet you know where this is going. But anyway, the husband became more obsessed with the game than our client, the wife. He would start playing as soon as he got home from work, and he would play late into the night. Sometimes he would call in sick to work because he wanted to keep playing, and she just had enough of it. And he wouldn't go to counseling. Their relationship was suffering. Their bank account was suffering. So she just wanted out. So in the course of gathering information to file a complaint for the divorce, she said she found out that he had created a second profile that he had hidden from her. And in the game, he was spending time with a female avatar and had had virtual relationships with her on Second Life. And that they had apparently also exchanged phone numbers and were getting ready to meet when our client found out about it. And nothing that happened in real life that we know of, but here we went on a divorce that started out being very civil and amicable to pretty contentious. And that's it for this video. I have more stories. If you want them, let me know. And here is a picture of where I am currently at on this pyrography. Got to keep going on it. There's a lot more to do. It takes a long time, but I'm having a lot of fun with it. And I hope you enjoyed watching it. Thanks, guys. Bye.